1, and that h5 pawn is actually a target. The queen can no longer get there to defend the pawn, and the king can't really go up because if king g6, well, maybe you can play king g6 because again, the rook on e8 is tied to e3. If rook g8, king f6, so maybe black still holds it like this, but it's a bit tenuous.
We see Magnus has played your suggested rook to e8, which means Jan is on the clock, and for the first time in the entire game, we may be in a position where Jan is about to be down on the clock versus Magnus. They do have increment, so of course we're no longer fearing for our life when we're under a couple minutes, but time pressure will have an influence on this game. Mark our words.
And rook h1 now, trying to go after that pawn. There could be some queen d5 stuff happening. You don't want to put your rooks in a line like that, as queen d5 does look very scary. And I guess white is able to save the material, but that's too close for comfort.
Yeah, you don't want to allow things like that. That's when you start to get in trouble.
Yeah, go ahead.
The good thing for white is that even if white were to trade the a1 rook for the b6 bishop, it's a draw.
Okay, Jan
he plays
f5. He must be, whether he's right or wrong, he must have visualized something that he feels is a fortress, something that he can hold the blockade based on the balance of a combination of pressure on e3 and the inability for white to pick up these pawns without basically releasing defense of said e-pawn. This must be what he's going for.
You see the hesitation, though? He went to grab the f-pawn to go f5, and he paused, stopped, and then made the move. So
it's a super committal move. I'd be nervous AF.
Yeah, it's a very
nervous as Bobby.
It's a very nerve-wracking moment because he's trying and has been trying to survive for a long while now. And if white can fully coordinate those rooks, that's when danger can happen. But because e3, that's really the key here, is that if the knight ever moves away from e2, there's checks in the second rank. Mm-hmm. If the knight doesn't move, then the bishop and queen are aiming at the e3 pawn. You can't get both of your rooks into the action in a way that allows white to kind of try to get a win here.
I think what we might see is rook to h1, king to g6 to defend that pawn, and then rook to c1. You lured the king forward a bit, and then maybe rook c6 becomes an idea. This is sort of a position of instead we see rook to a8, which also makes sense. It doesn't have a very obvious threat, but maybe he's hoping that rook to g8, king to f6, rook to e8 sort of traps that king on f6.
Is he switching which rook is defending?
Yeah, and just imagine that white has another move here. Let's say black plays bishop c5, rook to g8, king to f6, rook to e8. And if white were able to play rook to e5 right now, then black would suddenly be in danger.
Yeah, because of rook to g5.
And also because of tactics like bishop d6, rook takes f5, things like that with a knight d4.
Oh wow.
Fork.
I'm gonna show that just for the thrills. I don't actually know how to create
it's difficult to make it happen.
Yeah. Play bishop b6.
Okay.
Rook e5 and then bishop c7.
Okay, there we go. And the whole point is we have rook takes f5.
Yeah.
With a fork town, big town.
The thing is that even if white, it starts to get dangerous. This is not a winning position, but you start with a small idea. Your opponent gets a bit nervous. That's the way you win these positions. It's just it starts to get a bit of pressure, a bit lower on time for your opponent, and then eventually he makes a serious mistake.
All big things start with a small idea, Fami.
All journeys start with a single step.
All rook endings are drawn.
Maybe not this one.
This is not.
This is objectively drawn.
You outplayed me on unnecessary, out of place pop culture references.
Yeah,
Robert.
I was gladly sitting aside. I felt it was better to ignore than participate. But yeah, it's actually getting very tricky here for black because these rook g8, rook e8 ideas. When you say that your king has no moves for black, you may see ghosts, but there also could be mating nets and ideas that are hard to meet. So even coming up with the move at this point for black isn't that straightforward. Queen d5 does come to mind as one option, trying to maybe reroute the queen over to h1, but that doesn't really threaten them much. The king can eventually escape anyway. So yeah, this is a big moment for Jan.
Has to be a concrete defense, something accurately calculated, because as you both have been pointing out, there are different types of draws, right? And sometimes there's the type of position where you have to try not to change anything. Just say pass, right? Don't let your opponent trick you into doing something or changing something. This is the opposite. Black has to find something concrete and bring pressure against the white king before the rooks coordinate and finally start taking advantage of these weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that black has a number of decent moves.
What was that look there?
No, it's a bit concerning, but 5-0, I think is going to say that black has options, though, right?
Black has options. I don't think black is in any way forced.
Okay.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because sometimes a lot of moves look the same, but one of them isn't, and you end up making that move. On the other hand, it should be a good thing for your defense, because you're never in that situation where you have to find that one path to equality. I like the move queen d5 that was suggested. It kind of eyes that rook on a8. The only downside is it doesn't eye e3. But queen to h1 does seem like an annoying idea. Maybe it doesn't have an immediate threat, but if that rook on a8 moves, queen to h1, followed by queen to h2, bishop to a5 check, if white's king goes to e1, that king could get flushed out.
What's the line there again?
Yeah,
d5.
I'm not sure, but let's just say white continues with that idea. Rook g8, king f6, rook a to e8.
King
No,
F.
not king f6.
Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna.
King f6, rook a to e8, and if queen h1, then I think black has a threat of queen to h2, king e1, bishop a5. And this might just lead to a draw by perpetual.
Yeah, and rook e5 now, there is bishop c7 possible because there are no forks against this queen, right? The queen on b3 would allow rook takes f5 with the fork on d4, which is what we were talking about earlier, but now the rook is forced to move. And
Yeah, this should be a draw. And also I think
There's no rook c6, so.
at pretty much any moment, black can start giving that queen h2, queen h1 check as well. So queen d5 is a nice looking move to me, but not the only move. I think Jan should be moving quickly now. I understand it's nerve-wracking. It's been a very long, intense game, and they're probably both exhausted by this point. But you don't want to get super low on time. That's when serious mistakes start to happen.
and only 9+ minutes, they do get the 30-second increment, so you can build up time. But what you were saying has some serious merit here, that black has a bunch of different moves that all look acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
They look pretty good, but then you make a careless move at some point because 4 moves look the same, and you make the inaccurate one, and then your king gets in trouble, your pawns may start falling off, maybe you walk into a pin at some point. That can be trouble. So, for example, I'm trying to think how to make this work. Let's say you go king g6, and you go rook a to b8, and you go bishop takes e3 check, thinking, okay, your rook is hanging there, right? Here, king f3 almost works for white, but there's bishop b6 check back, right? In order to save the bishop and save the queen at the same time. But these are moments that it's easy to overlook. A move like bishop back to b6. Of course, the players of this caliber will find that. But these sort of ideas, you just have limited time on the clock and you don't see that possibility. That's when things can get out of hand.
Yeah, Jan is thinking quite a while, so now it's clear that he, even though the position is objectively equal, he's the one under pressure. This is shown in the clock. He was up on time the entire game, up until this moment. This is pretty much the first time that Magnus is only slightly, but it is something, slightly ahead on the clock. And that 8 minutes that Jan has, he's probably not going to be getting much more time than that. You know,
Yep.
he's now living pretty much off the increment. And he might at some point make some quick moves and garner a bit of time. Queen to b4 is an unusual move, but I don't think it really changes anything, but it's a bit weird looking anyway. Rook to g8, king to f6. So what's the idea if rook a to e8? Or is it just his idea is you can't really improve after that?
I'm trying to make even sometimes a rook takes b6, like a6 or something. I'm just trying to figure out a way if I can get in time and it doesn't work here. But what I want to do is get my rook to g5 and